Good morning and welcome to a brand new session of our English class. Today we will be starting with a grammar lesson, phrases and clauses. I'm sure that in your lower classes you have studied about sentences and the different types of sentences. And we know that to make a complete and meaningful sentence, there are several units that go into a sentence. Out of these units, you have studied about words and phrases. Last year, you would have also studied about the different types of phrases and how to identify those phrases. So in today's class, we will be learning in detail about clause. So let us begin, and we will also learn some similarity and differences between a phrase and a clause. So let us go back to the time when you studied about sentences. You studied about subject, verb and object, or you studied about subject and predicate. You learned how to identify subject and predicate. So these are some common sentence patterns that are used in the English language. Keep this in mind because this will be helpful in understanding the phrases and clauses better. Now let's move on. What is a phrase? Let's just recall what you studied in your last year. So phrase is a group of words. What is it? It is a group of words. And what is the most important thing that you have to remember about a phrase? It's that it does not have a subject and verb combination. Now, in the previous slide, I showed you that these are the common sentence patterns. At least it should have a subject and verb. But here we read in phrase that it does not have a subject and verb combination. So will the sentence be meaningful, or will the phrase be a meaningful one? No, it will have no meaning. So phrase is a group of words. It does not have a subject and verb combination. Therefore, it will not be meaningful. Let's look at some examples. Near my home. Is there a subject in this sentence, or is there a verb in this sentence? No. Next one, afraid of the dark. Is there a subject or a verb? No. Will be working. Is there a verb? Yes, there is a verb, but is there a subject? No. This is a verb phrase. So only in a verb phrase there will be a verb. In all the other phrases there will be no verb. In the verb phrase you will notice that there is no subject. Okay, so now we can move on to the next one. Here are some examples of phrases. What you have to do is you have to try to find out the different types of phrases and send it to me. Next, we can move on to the clauses, and this is what we are going to study in detail. So, again we will see that it is a group of words. So, I told you that we will be learning some similarities between phrases and clauses. So, what is the first similarity? It is a group of words. Phrases are also group of words, and clause also is a group of words. But the difference is that it has a subject and verb combination. A clause has a subject and verb combination. Then it may or may not have meaning based on the type of clause. So next we will be studying about the different types of clauses. So based on that, it may have meaning or it may not be meaningful. But even if it does not have a meaning, it will still have a subject and verb combination, which makes it a clause. Here are two examples of clauses. The first one is he ate dinner. Now here first what you have to do is you have to identify whether there is a subject and verb. So he is the subject, ate is the verb, and dinner is the object. So what is this? Is it a phrase or is it a clause? Yes, it is a clause. Next one, when he came home. He is the subject again, came is the verb, home is the object. So what is this? This is also a clause. But there is a difference between these two clauses. To understand this difference better, we have to understand which are the types of clauses. So we can see that there are two types of clauses, an independent clause and a dependent clause. Now in this name itself, the hidden meaning is given. Independent means what? Independent means it does not depend on anyone else. It can have a meaning on its own. And what do you mean by dependent? For example, you are dependent on your parents. You need the help of your parents to go to school, to eat food, and to do all the other small activities at home. So you are dependent. That means to complete something, you need someone's help. That is dependent. Now, one clause is independent clause. So this independent clause has a speciality. It can also be acting as a sentence. And the other one is a dependent clause. This dependent clause needs a phrase or any other clause to complete its meaning. Independent clause is also known by the name main clause. So what are the features of an independent clause? It does not depend on anything. It is meaningful and it can act as a sentence. Example, Sam danced gracefully. Now, Sam being the name of a person is the noun. Dance is an action, so this is the verb. So since we have our subject and verb, what is this? This is a clause. But if you see, is there a meaning for this? Yes, of course there is a meaning. So this is the main clause or an independent clause. Now why did we say that it makes meaning? Because it has subject and verb. It makes sense and it is grammatically correct. You don't need to add anything after the sentence to make complete meaning. Next is the dependent clause, and it's also known by the name subordinate clause. Now, what are the features of a subordinate clause or a dependent clause? It depends on another phrase or clause. The second point is it is not meaningful on its own. So a dependent clause, I already told you, depends on some phrase or another clause. So on its own it is not meaningful. Then it cannot act as a sentence. So since it is not meaningful, it will not be able to act as a sentence. But like any other clause, a dependent clause also will have a subject and verb. Let's look at an example. When he came back. Now the first thing is you have to identify whether there is subject and verb. So he is the subject and came is the verb. Now when he came back, does this have any meaning or do you get any meaning? If we say when he came back, then we will definitely ask the question, what happened when he came back or why did he come back? So it does not give us a complete meaning. Thus we can say that this is a subordinate clause or a dependent clause. It is a dependent clause because we need to add something before the sentence to complete its meaning. Like this, the sentence is not meaningful. So it has a subject and verb, so it is a clause. And it does not make sense. It requires some phrase or clause to complete the meaning, so it is a dependent clause. Look at this example. He ate dinner. Now first we have to identify the subject and verb. So he is the subject and ate is the verb. Now this is a complete and meaningful sentence. So we can say that it is an independent clause. It doesn't need the help of any other phrase or clause to complete its meaning. And look at the other hand, when he came back, he is the subject, came is the verb. But this is not a complete and meaningful sentence. How can we make this complete and meaningful? If we add an independent clause to the dependent clause, we can make it complete and meaningful. For example, he ate dinner when he came back. So, a dependent clause and an independent clause can together form a complete and meaningful sentence. Now, look at these examples. I knew from the beginning that he wanted to go home. Now, if we say only that he wanted to go home, is it complete and meaningful? No, it is not. But when we add an independent clause, I knew from the beginning, then this sentence becomes complete and meaningful. The same happens with the second one. The children were crying because they were hungry. So, if we say only because they were hungry, it's not complete and meaningful. The next one, I would go out if I was allowed. If we say only if I was allowed, it's not complete and meaningful. So we added an independent clause, I would go out. You will see here that each of these sentences have a dependent clause and an independent clause, and each clause has its own subject and verb. So here is what we studied today. We studied about clause and the different types. So there are two types of clause: dependent clause, which is also known by the name main clause, or an independent clause, which is known by the name subordinate clause. Then we studied what is a phrase and what is a clause. Phrase is a group of words with no subject and verb combination, and clause is a group of words with subject and verb combination. Usually, a dependent clause will start with the following words: when, whenever, while, before, after, if, because, or unless.